Recording now. All right, so we are recording. Okay, so let's do, is this big number K, J, X? What are we on?
I think N.
N like November?
Mhm.
Okay, let's do it. Big number N. Kira says N. She's never lied to me before, so we'll go with N. Okay, Pooja's driving to the school to do the NHS induction, presumably?
Yeah.
All right, so big number N, A. Phillip Randolph and Bayard Rustin. A. Phillip Randolph and Bayard Rustin. Okay, so these two men are the leading Black labor organizers. Okay, they are the most important labor leaders, like union leaders, in the country at this point in time. Okay, this is in the 1930s and 40s. Okay, Randolph is the leader of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. That's the name of his union, and it's the largest Black union in the country. Do you guys know what a sleeping car porter is? You know what a porter is, like for a train? Raul, do you know what a porter does on a train?
Do they kind of like attend to each cabin?
Yeah, that's pretty good actually. Yeah, they kind of end up being like butlers almost, you know. So they're going. The sleeping cars where people would travel overnight and they sleep. The porters are the ones who like help people carry their bags and deliver food and do all that kind of stuff, right? This union is so big, it actually includes all sorts of other jobs too. It includes like mechanics and construction people and all sorts of other jobs too, but they just kept the name. All right, so A. Phillip Randolph has been one of the labor leaders since after World War I. So at this point in time, he's been doing this for a while, right? He's been like 20 years in the position. He's been doing this for a while. And when World War II breaks out in the 1940s, in 1943, the United States goes to war in December of 43. When FDR nationalizes all of the factories in order to make the factories stop producing civilian stuff and start producing military stuff, right? The factories don't hire Black people. A. Phillip Randolph cries foul on this. Remember, the Great Depression's still going, right? And Black people have like a 30% unemployment rate at this time. And so Randolph chimes in and he says, you need to hire our people. You need to hire our people. You can't do this by yourselves. And these racist people aren't hiring us, right? You've nationalized all of the factories. You need to hire our people. This falls on deaf ears because the leadership is all like Southerners and stuff like that, right? And so he goes on strike. Randolph and Rustin is his like second in command. Randolph and Rustin, they go on strike, and the largest Black unions in the country goes on strike at the same time. And when they do it, a whole bunch of other unions go on strike with them, including some sympathetic white unions. And they go on strike, and they demand that they be given some of the jobs that are opening up. Okay? Now, Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, the moral conscience of the Roosevelt family, she takes Franklin aside and tells Franklin that he needs to negotiate. She's the one who kind of gets them together. So Randolph and FDR get together and they negotiate, and FDR agrees that if Randolph will get his people back on work, if Randolph will get all of his people working again, FDR will issue Executive Order 8802. Executive Order 8802 by FDR, it's one of the most famous executive orders of all time. This is the order that says all federal jobs will be race blind. All federal jobs will be race blind, and that Black people will be given the same opportunities for federal jobs as anyone else. And so they immediately start hiring Black people for all of these federal jobs, for all these factories. And as soon as they do that, Randolph and Rustin call off the strike, right? Randolph's in negotiating, Rustin's out managing the strike, right? These guys work together. They're like partners for decades, okay? These two men are going to go on to be vastly important to the movement, okay? Vastly important to the movement, because these two men end up being kind of like the primary organizers for the civil rights movement in a lot of ways, okay? If you think about the civil rights movement, most people, when they conceive it, they have this like weird kind of reductionist view that we all get in like second grade, right? Where most people grow up thinking that the civil rights movement is just Martin Luther King. Like Martin Luther King wrote a really good speech and the whole country went, oh, wow, you're right. Right? That's not what happened. That's not what happened, but that's what like second graders will tell you, right? And then fifth graders will tell you, oh, no. Rosa Parks didn't give up her seat, and then Martin Luther King wrote a really good speech, right? And then all the white people go, yep, that sounds about right. And when you get into high school, normally what happens is they'll say, Rosa Parks didn't give up her seat, and Martin Luther King wrote a really good speech, but also Malcolm X was really angry and is probably a bad guy, right? Most civil rights classes give you that three, right? The trinity of the civil rights movement, and usually Malcolm X is portrayed as a bad guy, right? In that, right? I'm here to tell you that the civil rights movement is more than three people. I promise you it's more than three people, okay? And if I had to like rank in importance, I probably would put A. Phillip Randolph as number 4. I'd probably put him as the number 4 important guy. He's really, really important. Bayard Rustin might be number 5 or 6. Like he's also very, very important, okay? So A. Phillip Randolph controls all the labor unions. What happens later though, these guys become the people who organize all of the marches, all of the speeches, all of the like, they get the audience out, they arrange for the, security escorts, right? They build the stages, they run the wires for the microphones, they run the speakers, they bring the television cameras, right? Without these guys, Martin Luther King is just some dude talking in the park. These guys, Martin Luther King calls up Randolph, and he says, hey, Randolph, if I come up to Washington, D.C. and give a speech next week, can you get me a crowd? And Randolph says, yeah, I can get you 500,000 people by Friday. And Martin Luther King says, how much if we wait a week? And Randolph says, I can get you 1 million if you wait a week. And King's like, excellent, let's wait a week, right? And then King shows up a week later, and Randolph has brought 1 million people to the National Mall, right? And Randolph has a stage built and speakers and microphones and television cameras and 1 million people, and labor unions across the North have all sent people to the meeting. Okay? Without these guys, it doesn't happen. Okay? They don't get a lot of credit because neither of them are big speech makers. They both kind of just fade away and they let King do his magic, right? I mean, if you're working with the greatest speechwriter that the United States has ever produced, you let him speak, right? Let the greatest speaker ever speak. You just set up the stage, okay? And we see this a lot. This one's Randolph right here. Randolph's the one with the alpha glasses. A. Phillip Randolph is in a lot of the pictures. When Martin Luther King gives his I Have a Dream speech, Randolph is standing on his right hand. Randolph is standing on the stage with King when he does it, right? When King is marching through Washington, Randolph is standing there locked in arms with King as they walk down the street, okay? So he's there in almost all these pictures. He's there, okay? He's there. And in a lot of ways, he's probably more important than Rosa Parks. He might be, okay? Rustin, with the glasses here, Rustin's different. Rustin, you're not going to find in any pictures, very few pictures. Occasionally you'll find a picture of him, like I found one here, right? But Rustin isn't in the pictures with King. Rustin isn't on the stage with King. The reason why is that Bayard Rustin is gay. He's gay. His best buddy Randolph knows that, right? And accepts it. But the public isn't going to accept that. Randolph's not gay. Randolph's straight and married with kids, right? But they're best friends. And Rustin is gay. And so the civil rights leaders, especially all the religious Southern leaders, they all tell Rustin, that he can't be in the picture. It's too risky to have a gay man be in the picture, because if the news finds out that he's gay, then the entire movement becomes about a gay guy. Okay? You have to understand how deeply homophobic the country was at this time. It wasn't just homophobia, it was that homosexuality was illegal. If Rustin would have been found out as a gay man, he would have been thrown in jail. He probably would have been lynched. Yeah, what's up, Drew?
When you say in the picture, do you literally mean in the picture, or is that just a figure of speech?
Yeah, well, it's kind of both, but I said it, I meant it literally, right? Like when we look at the picture of Martin Luther King on the speech or on the stage giving "I Have a Dream" speech, right? And I see A. Phillip Randolph next to him and Coretta Scott King next to him, and I see, you know, John Lewis, and I see all these other people on the stage. Rustin's not there.
Oh, okay. All right.
I mean, literally, he's not in the picture,
Okay.
right? Rustin actually fades into the background a lot. He fades into the background for a lot of the movement, and Rustin's there the night before building the stage. He's there running the wiring. He's there organizing the people. He's making the phone calls, you know, but then on the day of, he just fades into the crowd, right? And eventually what ends up happening is some people do start finding out that he's gay, and he has to basically leave the movement because the movement is bigger than him. Right? So eventually what happens, I'll finish off Bayard Rustin's story here. Eventually what happens is we do get the gay rights movement. In 1969, we're going to get the Stonewall riots up in New York, and the gay rights movement starts up. And Bayard Rustin at that point does join the gay rights movement. After the gay rights movement gets started, after they start, like, gay people start showing up and start, you know, arguing for independence and stuff, or arguing for equality, Rustin does show up, and he does, like, come out of the closet, and he does become a member of the movement. But by that point, he's already in his upper 70s himself, right? He's already an old man at that point, right? He's like a 78-year-old man at that point, and he's like, I'm tired, I'm done. He's like, I'm done.
Did he ever get married?
No, well, gay marriage doesn't become legal in the United States till 2012, so no. Right? I mean, he
Not
died.
even like in secret or anything?
No. There was no such thing as a secret gay marriage. It didn't exist. You couldn't get it done. My neighbor in the real world, my neighbor is a transgender male to female, a transgender person, and my neighbor is 70 years old. Just underwent transgender surgery, actually, sex reassignment surgery, like 4 months ago at 70 years old, right? And I was talking to my neighbor, and she was telling me about one point in the 1980s when she, at the time was a he was married to a lesbian, and the lesbian's girlfriend was married to his boyfriend. So I had like two couples, two lesbians and two gay men married together, who would then, you know, have relationships with each other's spouses, right? That's the kind of arrangement that was back then. Or you just never got married, because that's just the way it was. Okay? Anyway, so these two guys are super, super, super important. And the reason why Bayard Rustin doesn't ever show up in these things is because he was gay. Yeah. A. Phillip Randolph dies in the late 60s. He's an old man. He dies in the late 60s. Yeah. All right. Big number M and O, right? O. Let's go with O. All right. So big number O. Big number O is veterans returning from the wars. We have World War II, and then Korea starts up almost immediately after World War II, right? Almost immediately, like within 6 months or something like that. Korea starts up really, really quick. What you're going to find is when you start looking through the civil rights movement, you're going to find a lot of veterans. There's a considerable number of veterans who are in this movement. We have these kind of factions within the movement, okay? In the North, we have the labor unions, and then we have the Nation of Islam, which we'll get to them later, right? In the South, we have these church groups, right? The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, like that's Martin Luther King's groups, okay? And then we're also going to get these veterans groups that operate. And all of these different spheres are kind of interacting with each other, okay? So let's talk about the veterans. So one of the groups that I think stands out really nicely is the Deacons of Defense and Justice. The Deacons of Defense and Justice is founded by these 4 men, Bob Hicks, Charles Sims, Chili Willie, and Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick. With a name like Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick, you know he had to become a civil rights leader. He had no choice. Your name can't be Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick and then you just become a video game designer. That's not how it works, right? All right, so Hicks, Sims, Thomas, and Kirkpatrick are all veterans who returned home from World War II. And if I remember correctly, Hicks and Thomas both came home from Korea also. They're double veterans. They came home from the war and they found that they were not welcome in their own hometowns, okay? Here's the thing about veterans. When you've just spent 4 years fighting a war, storming the beaches of Normandy, storming the island of Iwo Jima, right? Picking up your dead friend, stabbing a Japanese guy in the face. You know what I mean? Like when you've spent the last 5 years doing that, you're not going to just sit there and take it when some white dude tells you can't walk through the front door, right? Veterans have this like nasty habit of like not really listening to anybody, right? Veterans have this nasty habit of believing in justice and not really listening to anybody and sometimes being a little bit nuts, right? Veterans don't like to get pushed around very much. Nobody likes to get pushed around, but veterans are trained to fight back. Does that make sense? Right? So these guys fight back. These guys are based down in like Bastrop, Louisiana, right? This is like the Mississippi Delta, like down on the bottom of Louisiana in the deep, swampy nether regions of the state. These guys are down there, otherwise known as the heart of the KKK. They live in like the capital of the KKK, basically. And these guys are really sick and tired of the KKK telling them where they can and can't go. So these guys decide to start bringing assault rifles with them everywhere they go. And so they all take assault rifles, strap it on their backs with their veterans hats on and their veterans jackets on and their assault rifles over their shoulder, and they walk into the grocery store and buy a gallon of milk, right? Because they know that the KKK runs the store. And they walk in and they buy a gallon of milk, right? And it's basically a big middle finger, right, to the whole town saying, you can't touch us, right? If you touch me, I will shoot you with my assault rifle, right? And the Deacons of Defense and Justice basically start defending people and they start escorting people through the streets, right? Black women on their way home from work, they will show up and then they'll walk down the street with her. Black people trying to get on and off the bus, they show up with their guns and they escort them, right? Black people who get arrested for something, these guys show up at the courthouse to make sure that that person gets a court date and doesn't just show up lynched the next day, right? These guys are basically doing that, and they get in some fights sometimes, but usually they're able to intimidate the KKK to the point that the KKK backs off. And it works. It works. And what they find is that a lot of groups start to listen to them, and we find groups like this start showing up across the South. And this isn't part of the regular civil rights lesson that you get when you're learning about Martin Luther King in second grade, right? And Martin Luther King is profoundly uncomfortable with people like this, right? Martin Luther King is not comfortable with dudes walking around with assault rifles, right? But these guys are also not comfortable being hanged by a tree, right? Martin Luther King, these guys kind of operate for a long time in the background as this kind of like underlying threat that you have the option to listen to King, and if you don't listen to King, I still have my rifle on my back, right? King himself will say, don't carry a weapon. King himself will say that, and these guys disagree, right? I want you to understand that there's nuance here, right? There's a lot of people who disagree with this, and a lot of these veterans are going to walk around armed because that's what veterans do, is they're armed, right? Here's some other examples. These guys were These guys are further along in our timeline, but I'll just introduce you to them now. All right, Medgar Evers right here. Medgar Evers becomes the first black man to attend Ole Miss. Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi. He becomes the first black man to attend Ole Miss. After Brown versus the Board of Education tells Mississippi that they have to let him in, they refuse. He sues. He wins the court case. He attends Ole Miss and he gets his law degree and he joins the NAACP. He becomes one of the central leaders of the NAACP. Later on, in like 1959, during the rights movement, he is walking because it's during a bus boycott, and as he's walking, he gets attacked, and he walks about 2 miles on broken legs until he gets to safety, right? He then later on gets attacked later on after he heals up, and they meet him out in front of his house and assassinate him. He's murdered in 1961. And he was the leader of the NAACP, Mississippi's chapter of the NAACP, and he's murdered. Amzie Moore over here. Amzie Moore was a veteran who realized that he wanted to fight back, and he was sick and tired of a bunch of pushy white people telling him what to do. And so he organizes the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SNCC. He organizes that in Mississippi again, where he goes to colleges and he gets the students to organize protests. This is where we're going to get students at like food counters and stuff, and like store counters and restaurants and drinking fountains and things, where the students are all just going to line up and wait and protest and clog up the businesses until they get served. Amzie Moore survives. He lives. Aaron Henry right here. Aaron Henry, a man who's never been able to vote in his life, despite serving in both Korea and World War II, right? He is sick and tired of not being able to vote, even though the 15th Amendment says he should be able to. He organizes an organization called Freedom Vote, 1963, where he organizes black people across Mississippi to get them registered to vote, where they have to pass a literacy test, they have to pay a poll tax, they have to jump through all these hoops, and they have to do it when the KKK is watching them and threatening them. He organizes Freedom Vote in 1963, and when he tries to join the Democratic Party and they won't let him in, he founds his own Democratic Party, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, right? Eventually, after 1965, the MFDP, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, just absorbs into the regular Democratic Party, right? These are all examples of veterans who are quite insulted by being, they're good enough to go fight for the country, they're good enough to die for the country, but they're not good enough to walk in the front door to buy a gallon of milk. Okay, we see this a lot. This is pretty common kind of narrative. Wars do this to people, and wars cause this kind of stuff going on. How much time do we got? What time do you guys got?
2:11.
Okay, all right. I'm going to stop here. This is a good place to stop. We'll pick up with Harry Truman next time. Do you guys have questions about any of this stuff? Do you have stop?